Welcome to the Startup Club podcast, where we share the journeys of invention, failure, resilience, and triumph of some of South Africa's foremost and exciting tech startup founders and investors. I'm Matthew Marsden, founder of Startup Club ZA, and on the show today, Alex Forsyth-Thompson, founder and CEO of Float, Africa's first card-linked installment platform, disrupting buy now, pay later by letting shoppers split their payments when buying big-ticket items, whilst encouraging responsible spending by using existing credit. Now, in just over 3 years live and a team of 10, Float has landed 600 plus big-name merchants, including Apple, Samsung, and the Pro Shop. They've raised meaningful equity and an $11 million facility from Standard Bank. They also placed top 5 in the 2023 Visa Everywhere initiative. But of course, there's always more to the story. Now, before we get into today's discussion, Startup Club ZA is built on impactful collaborations, and today's episode is brought to you in partnership with one such collaborator, and that's ALX Ventures. Now, ALX Ventures partners with technical talent to tackle the world's greatest challenges through business. ALX themselves provide a pathway to support aspiring entrepreneurs to launch and scale their startups. And they're on a mission to develop, connect, and fund African entrepreneurs to create 1 million jobs by 2030. We took the opportunity to sit down with ALX General Manager, Devesh Suka, to discuss more about their work and how they support the founders of tomorrow. And you can hear more of that interview at the halfway mark of today's episode. Or you can visit alxafrica.com to learn more. For now though, let's get back to today's episode.
So it was amazingly exciting and I learned a lot, and that's what propelled me into the group exec role, the head of innovation role, where the next batch of leadership at Forbes kind of said, do what you did there again. And I was like, I'm keen for the role, but I will never build inside a corporate again. It's just like trying to swim upstream completely. But what we can do is look out into the world of fintech and see what other people are building and how we can enable it, partner with them, invest in it. And that was the route we decided to go. And man, when you see what's actually going on in that world and you have that spark, like I said to you, it's hard to erase that from your thinking. So there was no turning back after that exposure.
In the fast-moving world of global fintech, buy now, pay later has become a household concept, with global giants like Klarna, Afterpay, and Split processing hundreds of billions of dollars each year on behalf of merchants. Now, whilst the concept is more popular in developed markets, this wave of innovation has swept to Africa, and particularly in the last 5 years, has reshaped how many consumers finance their transactions and how merchants grow their bottom line. In South Africa in 2021, one of our first movers, Payflex, was acquired by Australia's Zip for an undisclosed sum on the back of exponential growth. Now, the incentive for merchants here is obvious, as it allows them to access previously untapped revenue. But buy now, pay later by its very nature also skirts a fine line if not offered responsibly, and the care taken to only enable customers that can really afford it, where more easy credit could likely worsen our country's already bad consumer debt crisis. So, what if you could offer buy now, pay later in a way that encouraged responsible credit card usage, whilst at the same time helped merchants win more business? And it was that kind of thinking, coupled with a growing restlessness to start something of his own, that spurred today's guest, Alex Forsyth-Thompson, to leave his comfortable job at one of the country's leading financial services businesses and kick off a whirlwind journey as a tech entrepreneur.
I had a very fortunate upbringing, a very loving family. I'm one of 3 boys. Both my brothers are blonde hair, blue eyes, and then out came the literal black sheep as the middle child. Was given a Swazi name, Uvelapi, which means where did you come from? My dad actually grew up in Swaziland, and my mum was born in Cyprus actually, and she moved out when she was very small. They met at church, and that was very fundamental to my upbringing. So we grew up in a good Christian family home. You know, your normal family kinks and that, but we didn't want for anything. My dad, he worked for a very big American corporate called Dow Chemicals, and they sort of pulled out of South Africa. There was a gap there for him, and he started his own business. That was when we were very small. So I don't even remember it, but that always stuck with me, that, you know, it was always that my dad had his own business, and that's the norm. That's the normal thing to do. And we're lucky that was the sole source of income. My mom could focus on raising us, you know, really pouring into our lives and making sure that we always had meals and, you know, clothes and all those sort of things. So super fortunate as far as South Africa goes. And yeah, I think in terms of whether you're born or made, I don't know, a bit of both. I think there has to be something in you initially that will spark that desire. But as you almost jokingly alluded to, I think it's sometimes those experiences or exposure to things that actually triggers it. And for some people, it sits there dormant and it doesn't ever come alive, and they sit there wondering why they didn't do it. But for me, I think just seeing my dad be an entrepreneur, be a business owner, you know, building and launching products all the time, and that's always stuck with me.
Now, in that context, you know, what kind of kid were you? Were you outgoing, outspoken, charismatic? Yeah. Were you also the enterprising kid, selling stuff when you could and taking advantage of market days? What was that like?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of evolved as I grew up, as many of us do. I think I was always a rough and tumble type kid. So always like splitting the eye, or, you know, getting scabs on something, falling out the jungle gym type of thing. And so that was always in my nature. I wasn't scared of too much, if you could put it that way. But I was a very law-abiding, you know, very rules-based. If my mom did something, I'd always say to her, "No, you're not allowed to do that." I'm sure she'll share those stories with you one day. Yeah, and then I think as I started to get older, I got a lot more chutzpah, and you know, always had a decent group of mates, and became definitely a lot more outgoing as I grew older. Yeah, the first entrepreneurial thing that I think I did was, I think I was about 9 or 10, and at church, I don't know if you remember those WWJD bands.
Sure.
Which everyone was wearing, and they're like, I started wearing a purple one to class, and my mates were like, "What is that?" And I was like, "No, it means what would Jesus do?" And they were like, "Oh, I mean, half of them I don't think were Christian at all."
Sure.
They're like, "Oh, I'd love one of those."
Fashionable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I went and bought a whole bunch at church, and then I came and like sold them. I sold them at school, but I was actually terrible at it, because I ended up just giving a whole bunch away to my mates. So that was probably my first failed venture, and that my mom funded for me. So.
The safety net.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then I loved sport. I loved rugby. That was my main passion. Like, we grew up wearing Sharks kit. Oddly enough, living in Joburg, but we were big Shark supporters. Because I ended up going to school down there. My dad was at school in varsity there. Yeah, and then just close family, close with my brothers. We'd fight a lot. All very different personalities, but also extremely close. And yeah, and then I went off to high school. I'm sure we'll get into.
Sure. So yeah, 2002, you head off to Hilton College. Great school, one of the best in the country, arguably.
Yeah.
And does that give you the boost? You know, do you know when you're in it that you're in an exceptional place? Are you conditioned and groomed that way, or what was it like?
Yeah. So we were very fortunate. I went to St. Peter's Prep in Joburg, which you'd know, also fantastic school, amazing education. Also, they had things like market days where you had to go build a business and learn how to sell and stuff. And it sounds silly, but you remember a lot of those lessons, interestingly. But then Hilton, it was an amazing privilege to go to the school. My father went there, so it was one of those typical stories. his dad went there. I mean, the double barrel surnames are probably the giveaway.
Yes.
But unbelievably grateful for that period. I think in the world today, for some reason, the word privilege has become a swear word, and I think that's nonsense. I think you should be aware if you're privileged, be grateful for it. You can't think that everyone has access to that, and therefore it is the norm. But it was an enormous privilege to go there. It's a really, yes, they got fantastic facilities, very expensive, obviously, to go there, but really strong in tradition, discipline. We all the guys from Joburg who went down there, I mean, whether we knew it or not, you had the, Joburg kid, spoiled kid attitude, a lot of us, even if it wasn't in spades, but you got in line very quickly, very, very quickly. And that's what makes the school so great, in my opinion. Great ethos, great discipline. You're folding your clothes in a perfect A4 and stuff like that. But the real value outside of it, I think the school teaches you, and that environment teaches you to think really big, like really big. You meet people that talk about things that are almost inconceivable, especially when you're a youngster. But I think when you go out into the world and you think big and you aim big, just that mind shift of thinking about things in a very big way makes a huge difference. But it was a great period. Again, played a lot of rugby, and there was a lot of outdoor activities. Obviously in your teen years, you want to be jawling and all those things. So no, it was a special time.
A quick shameless plug for Hilton over the last couple of seconds on the podcast. But tell me, were you good academically? Were you a top achiever? Did that play a role in all of this?
When I was at prep school, I won. I mean, there were several. It's not like I was the only one, but I won an academic prize and art prizes almost every single year. At Hilton for the first few years, I was always A-set everything and stuff. And I must say, I think it happens to a lot of guys in their teen years. The academics, it really took a back seat. I was only interested in playing rugby and just being naughty around the house and those sort of things. Got it back together a little bit towards the end of high school when I realized I had to actually get into university. So I got decent marks, few A's and that sort of thing. And then I kicked back into gear late in varsity and studied charters and CFPs and all those sort of things.
And was the goal now still in the back of your mind? I know I want to start something. And are you at that fork in the road where you're like, gosh, do I go and study or do I start something? And once I'm studying, when that's done, do I start something or do I go and work somewhere? What was your thinking like there?
No, dude. I think when we finished school, you probably went through it. You do career counseling and, these people do tests on you and try to see, I couldn't fathom, it made no sense to me that I'm 17 turning 18 and I now need to choose a path that's going to define my life. That makes no sense to me. There are definitely kids that know they want to be doctors or lawyers or accountants, maybe, and that's great. But that can't be the norm. So I still think I don't know what the better alternative is, but I think that's a weird system. And I was very, very confused at the time as to what I wanted to do. I was getting a lot of conflicting feedback about what it might be. Entrepreneurship was always the option, but I was never going to leave high school to go build something. It wasn't like I'm definitely going to be an entrepreneur and this is just a stepping stone. It was more, I don't know what I want to be, but I do know that I want optionality and I want to see what's out there before I choose. So basically chose the most general, Bachelor of Commerce, Management Sciences at Stellies. Pretty classic because I just thought that's a good launch pad for what I'm, going to figure out next.
Sure. So that's 2007 to 2010. You're at Stellenbosch University, and like me, very general degree when we get in. 2011, you end up doing a postgrad diploma in financial planning. And was that something now you had this innate interest for? Was this just, hey, this is just good credentials and it gives me more options once I figure it out?
Oh man, the answer to this is so bad. I spoke to, again, I think you just had no concept of what actual careers meant. I do think a lot of youngsters don't fully understand. But I was like, look, I like numbers and I enjoy finance and commerce, but I didn't want to sit behind a desk I had nightmares about like sitting and just doing Excel all day. Ironically, I love building a financial model now and all that financial engineering stuff. And the guidance we got was, look, CFP, you are doing the finance side and, you're managing people's assets and stuff, but you deal with people all the time and you're selling as well. And I was like, that's cool. I like that. So that was literally the decision, man.
Fair. I think that's more clarity than most people even have, by the way.
Really?
Just giving yourself the options, right?
Yeah.
2012, you take a gap year, and we won't focus too much on that because I'm sure it was just an opportunity for you to just figure some things out. But you did some traveling, you maybe worked some odd jobs. I know you were overseas for a little bit. Would you recommend? Would you not recommend?
Highly recommend. Highly recommend. I often think if it would have been better to do it straight after school, to be honest, but that departure just from all the structure of boarding school to varsity was enough. I don't know how I would have handled doing a gap year. I would have just disintegrated basically, but definitely recommend. Just to give yourself a break, see the world. I worked and did some stuff in the ski slopes in Canada, when I worked on the yachts, went with some mates to Sri Lanka. We bought a tuk-tuk and entered in a race around Sri Lanka called the Lanka Challenge. Amazing stuff. And I actually had a lot more clarity and readiness to enter the workplace, to be honest. So yeah, definitely recommend.
So much of this or these experiences is not just about, I guess, who we know and what we do, but like the people we're becoming.
Yeah.
And I think people forget that, especially going into varsity and coming out. It's like, what are these things doing and what is that creating in us?
Yeah.
I think a gap is a huge asset in that respect.
Yeah. Massive. Just on that note, I think
please.
Some of my most telling experiences haven't necessarily been, things that I saw that drove me towards things. It's almost been like you've experienced something, you're like, that's not what I want for my life. Or you see things, you're like, that's not for me, kind of thing.
No is also an answer, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think getting experiences, the right experiences, also knowing that that's not the path to use. Positive.
2013, after this, what sounds like a amazing race of a gap year, you decide to join the financial services business and start out into Alexander Forbes, significant JSE listed entity, household name. And you end up spending a couple of years there. Talk to me about, what was the thinking to join there? What was the thinking of sticking around there? You held a couple of roles over 5-6 years. Maybe walk us through that stint of your career.
Yeah. So as I said, off the back of the gap year, I kind of like my readiness to enter the world changed a lot. People use the term worldliness. We might know it as a different term, but that sort of readiness to enter the workplace and that maturity was there. Alexander Forbes they had quite a strong wealth management division, financial planning division. Obviously, I'd done the CFP, so I was quite intent on just getting that certification and getting that stamped. And just the timing worked out. I mean, honestly, I was very, very fortunate that it worked out that way. I managed to get a job as it was called a financial well-being consultant, which was like basically the most junior person in the financial planning division. It was awesome exposure to that industry. I did really well building a book. Signed, I think I did my year's target in like 3 months, 2 months even, I don't know, signed 1 or 2 big clients, people that I'm actually still in contact with today. But Forbes at that time, this was probably the most pivotal thing, sort of the arc in the story was Edward Kieswetter. He's the SARS commissioner, but he'd come across to Forbes to sort of reinvigorate it after they delisted and a whole bunch of stuff. And he brought across with him this whole innovation culture and young leadership and all these kind of things. Big, this was the 2010s, corporate innovation was all the buzz. And, it was just a great time to be there as a keen youngster, which I was. And also someone who's like, cool, that's my job, but I want exposure to all these other things. I put my hand up for a bunch of stuff. I was always putting ideas in. Most of them were just terrible. Just had no idea what was going on. And one or two got through, and we can talk a bit more about that now.
It's an interesting. I think what you're understating here is, this is a very short period in the context of a lifetime, 5-6 years of your life, but you end up doing some pretty remarkable things despite being in your 20s. Go from consultant to project coordinator, from project coordinator to running a number of this idea of entrepreneurship, doing entrepreneurial type ventures within a bigger organization. You head up the Stockville investments arm and a venture called Kin at Alex Forbes, and eventually are promoted to executive of group innovation. This is a guy in his 20s, which is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
Maybe talk to us about, what's your headspace like when you're now in this super senior role. You've built some of these things internally, which some, like you've said, worked, some probably didn't.
Yeah.
Because I imagine that also then fuels a bit of a fire for you to start thinking about something of your own.
No, absolutely. I think, the platform that was there, the encouragement to put ideas in and stuff. And honestly, a lot of it was so well intended. They really did want to do innovation. It's just very difficult to do it in a corporate. So they tried to give you all the support and all those things, but the stereotypical red tape was always there. I was always fighting with compliance and legal, because they don't want you taking any risks at all. But the big breakthrough was that Stockville investments you spoke about. Derek MCB sponsored a few of us to build out this Stockville idea that we had, that there's this dormant pool of assets, that people are just not using wisely, and why can't those access formal asset management? And it was before sort of the Stockville craze kind of kicked off. And so we partnered with the National Stockville Association. A guy named Andile Mazwai was chairman at that time. He'd made all his money selling off his stockbroking business or whatever, and that was his next big thing. And we partnered with them, and we were in the townships and all over the country doing Stockville and Darbers and whatever. So it was amazingly exciting, and I learned a lot, and that's what propelled me into the group exec role, the head of innovation role, where the next batch of leadership at Forbes kind of said, do what you did there again. And I was like, I'm keen for the role, but I will never build inside a corporate again. It's just like trying to swim upstream completely. But what we can do is look out into the world of fintech and see what other people are building and how we can enable it, partner with them, invest in it. And that was the route we decided to go. And man, when you see what's actually going on in that world and you have that spark, like I said to you, it's hard to erase that from your thinking. So there was no turning back after that exposure.
I mean, talk to me. This is 2018, comparably pretty high achieving in your 20s. And for some reason, you leave this job. You're getting restless. There is the spark you've just spoken about. Yep. Talk to us about that season. You're still single. You're not married.
Yeah.
Talk to us about that season. What causes you? Because it's not even like you had a safety net necessarily. You weren't jumping into a new fully funded venture.
Yeah.
What is that season like where you decide to leave Forbes and then go out on your own?
Yeah. So in my mind, I'd ticked off the CFP, got that certification. I also did my CFA during the time. So actually my social life did take a bit of a dip for a few years, all the studying and building those businesses. And the goal for me was to be, if I ever need to get a job again, to be employable, for a number of reasons, right? I need to be ultra qualified and I got to have the most mega CV out there. And that was always my thinking. Obviously, financially and all those things, climbing the ranks was great, but I just wanted to get as much exposure and experience as possible before I took the leap. And I think somewhere in that period, I knew very clearly that I was going to take the leap at some point, especially when we launched that Stockville business unit. So in my mind, it wasn't about, okay, I'm letting go of this big pay packet. And now what? It was, okay, well, I'm now heading to my late 20s. It's actually getting a bit late for me because I do want to get married and have kids and all these sort of things. And if I'm going to take a risk on my own life and stuff, it better be now. And that was it. And once I'd seen the industry, felt that I learned enough and had a concept that I thought was reasonably sound. It wasn't a difficult decision, even with the risk, because what was the worst that could happen? I could move back with my folks. So, yeah.
So what was the concept? Because obviously that a lot of this hinges on, well, I've seen something that I want to run after now. Talk to us about that, because that's not what Float is today, and we'll get into how you've moved into founding a more significant business. But what was that first iteration? You've handed in your resignation letter. I'm no longer employed.
Yeah.
What are you working on?
So it was close. I mean, during that time where I was heading up innovation, we had sort of two core problem statements that we were looking at, because to just innovate broadly is crazy, and it took us a bit of time to refine it. But one was money management, just helping people to be better with their spend day to day. Most people don't have any disposable income, so trying to deal with that problem. But two was the credit problem, either helping people to borrow more responsibly or to get out of debt. And two things that Forbes, as great a company as it is and wasn't really solving for. That when you had the money, the excess money to insure or invest, great, but otherwise couldn't really help you. Particularly in the credit space, looked at a whole bunch of models. We partnered with a payroll lending company out of the UK to bring their tech out here. So saw a whole bunch of models. But I had we've got a lot of friends in Brisbane in Australia, coincidentally, and obviously they knew I was in the role and was looking for things, and I got sent this prospectus for a company called Afterpay in Australia, and I looked at it, I was like, well, this makes no sense. This model could never work. And basically for those listening, I mean, Afterpay was one of the originators of what we know as BNPL, or buy now, pay later, this pay and interest-free installments. So I was really excited about the model once I got to understand that, the consumer no longer pays for it and the merchant does. And I built something loosely on that concept, and that was what I'd actually resigned on. And once I got into the market and started speaking to partners and investors, guys were like, for a number of reasons, I would think twice about doing that model, but maybe there's another spin on it.
We trust you're enjoying today's episode, produced in partnership with our friends at ALX. We're going to take a quick break and hear from ALX General Manager Devesh Sukha before getting back to today's conversation.
Hi guys, I'm Devesh from ALX. ALX is a couple of things, but at the heart of it, we're a tech accelerator. Our sort of mission and vision with the MasterCard Foundation is to enable 2 million young men and women on the continent to find dignified employment by 2030, and 3 million by 2035. So big sort of dreams. Big dreams, and how we do this is we accelerate the careers of young people on the continent. I think the first obviously is, two big bets. One on tech training and soft skills training, and then entrepreneurship. So the whole idea is that we impact at scale. So on the training piece, we look at where globally the demand for jobs is. And we reduce the barriers to entry, and we facilitate access across the continent to it. Some idea of sort of numbers, right? And I'll give you an idea of the courses that we do. But in the first sort of 4 months of this year, we enrolled over 230,000 young people in our tech courses in 2024, right? So impact at scale. And the courses that we do, software engineering, cloud computing, data, so data analysts, data science. So really, if you look globally, which industries are growing, where are the jobs, that's where we offer the training. And then the second bet we make is with entrepreneurship, right? Because we've got this huge, big, audacious goal, 2 million young people in dignified employment and 3 million by 2035, right? So we need to move quickly, and we need to move at scale. So tech training, great, one way. Second piece is entrepreneurship, right? Because what we've found And you know, Alex has created over 9,000 entrepreneurs in the last couple of years, and in total, those 9,000 have generated over 60,000 jobs on the continent, right? So the idea is that for each startup we help create, they will employ between 5 to 7 people. So impact at scale, right? So that's really what Alex does. So what we try and do is we try and reduce the barriers to entry to these spaces, right? Because, you know, young people on the continent, you'll hear everything, right? Like, oh, you know, there's preconceptions that it's hard to do these things and hard to get into it, right? We're trying to demystify this entire thing. So we reduce the barriers to entry, right? And what that means is who that young person is, you're 18 to 34 and you're born on the continent, right? So you're from an African country and you are able to pass our selection test. And if you do that, you go into one of our courses. And remember, our courses are fully funded. So you could be coming out of high school and you've always dreamt to become a software engineer. Look at ALX, sign up to our program, do our selection test, and if you pass, you will get into our software engineering program. The startup space for me is, I mean, it's super exciting, right? Because the potential for impact here is incredible, right? What we try and do is, you know, with all of the young people that we bring into our community, whether it's in the tech training space or whether it's in the entrepreneurship space, we train for entrepreneurial leadership, right? So even if you're not even interested in starting a business, right, we train you for entrepreneurial impact, right? Because we want you to make an impact in your family, in your community, in your country. So what really excites me about this sort of startup space is that, I mean, it's all of those things, plus we're helping young people start businesses, and those businesses create impact in their communities, in the country, and they hire people. So, I mean, it's, you know, it's incredibly exciting. Why South Africa, apart from me being biased, is I think we've got incredible potential. I mean, I see it every day in all of the young people that I engage with on a daily basis. In the learners that we bring in, they all have these amazing stories. And it really is just magic because they tell stories, they're technically minded. You know, you'll have someone who had no idea they wanted to be a software engineer, you know, and all of a sudden they're 11 months in, almost done with our software engineering program, and they're talking tech and they're talking technical things, but they also have this incredible history and culture and the ability to tell that story. It really is magic. I think, you know, there's a couple of things that excites me, right? You know, in my team, in our company as a whole, and we've got a global team, right? Culture is incredibly important, right? Who you are, how you show up, the reason that you do things is incredibly important, right? And what excites me about this sort of engagement with you guys at the Startup Club, right, is I feel like there's a shared DNA. You know, community building, the fostering of relationships, the sharing of information, the showcasing of people who really need to be showcased. And for me, it's a complete no-brainer, right? So what excites me is everything, because I think it's just gonna snowball each other's impact in the country and in the continent. You know, if you ask me who I'd like to be in the community, I want to say everyone who wants to make an impact, right? So if you're a young person who's interested in tech, interested in entrepreneurship, even if you're not interested in tech, come in, go to alxafrica.com, sign up, come to one of our webinars, visit the hub, speak to some of our learners, because, you know, for us, the training is just a means to an end, right? We'll teach you how to become a leader, how to become entrepreneurial, all of those skills you can use in multiple different types of jobs, right? So if you're outside and you're not interested in any of that sort of stuff, right? Join our community to share your knowledge, to share your values, to teach young South Africans, to give something back. You know, because as part of this community, right, we teach people how to do the basics, right? How to do your LinkedIn, how do you do your CV, how to show up for an interview, right? If you have those skills, give them away, share them with people. So reach out to us. I mean, our email addresses are on alxafrica.com. Reach out to us. and join us in that space, right? Because we're not going to be able to do this alone. That's why, again, the sort of engagement with the Startup Club is important, right? So it's a call to action to everyone, right? Everyone who's looking to make an impact, everyone who's interested in tech and young people and development and entrepreneurship. Come have a conversation with us and let's see how we can all do this together.
That was Devesh Suka, General Manager of ALX. Thanks for listening, and now back to today's episode. At this point, I mean, are you thinking about building product? Are you just what does the day look like for you? Is it refining this model? Is it the Excel spreadsheets you now love? What is it? Talk to us about that couple of months before, because there was a gap here. There was a gap before you had any surety around capital, around team, around infrastructure. Talk to us about the gap.
So once I had the concept there, I started, this was moonlighting at the time, right? I was trying to figure out what was going to be next. So in the evenings was working on a pitch deck, a business case. Luckily being in corporate and having done a few things, I was quite adept at least at building a business case and ticking those boxes. And especially as a non-technical founder, technical in terms of coding, I knew those steps to get through to validate a business idea. Big lean startup fanboy, built the landing page, drove traffic, had a lot of data to go out and actually say, look, I think this will work and this is how it's resonating, and you haven't actually built anything. Mm-hmm. So there are a lot of boxes you can tick before. And I'd spoken to a couple of potential investors. One of them was a potential tech partner to sort of power the back end of the system, exactly the way that Afterpay was actually built, non-technical founders on top of an existing tech stack. And when I had that validation and we sort of shook hands and said, we'd do something together, I resigned. Unfortunately, it didn't work out with those partners. And there was a long time, about a year and a half in the wilderness. And I just did odd jobs consulting. But it was during that period that I actually refined the idea. Still was very set on getting a tech partner, building on top of that and focusing what's core to the business. Which I don't think is necessarily that back-end tech, to be honest. And then eventually got there. Yeah,
it's great wisdom as well, because I think a lot of founders are inclined to raise capital and then hire technical talent probably way too early.
Yeah.
And strategically, it can make a lot more sense, depending on the model, to get the tech partner onto the cap table. They worry about the stuff they are proficient in, and you can go ahead and build a business. And I think that I've admired that about the way you've built Float from day one. I think of course, it's hard to do justice to a couple of years here in a very short space of time, but that kind of 18 months in the wilderness for you, there's still a lot of uncertainty, right? Is this thing going to work? How does this go from, I'm now just consulting to also pay the bills? This is now getting into kind of 2019.
Yeah.
You'd met your now wife by then, yes.
Yeah, we were dating then.
And she, like my wife, had to put up with a lot of figuring it out season.
Yeah, meandering.
Meandering, correct, is the right term. When does the rubber hit the road here? When do you meet your investors?
Yeah.
When do you start writing code on product or the tech partner? Talk to us about how this materializes into Float.
Yeah. And it's something I've not spoken about outside of I've never spoken about it on a public forum behind the scenes, but how integral some of the investors and partners were initially. So as I said, and just a soundbite for any entrepreneurs that are listening, just know what's core to your business, know what you need to build and own, and what is your core IP and core competency. Build that and focus on that. The rest, go get off the shelf, find open source, partner with people. I don't believe you have to build and own the tech from scratch. So there are smarter, faster ways to get out and find those ways. And I think it's super important. Anyway, but so that was the mindset. So needed capital to pay myself and develop what we needed a tech partner to sort of be our core engine, loan management system, but a lot more. And I suppose we'll talk about how Float works so that all this stuff makes sense, but we needed a core engine, needed some capital, and then I had to do some software dev. There's a gentleman that I met a few years earlier named Richard Came. He's known as Puppy Came by a lot of people, but his daughters were good friends of mine at school, and we'd met when I was at Forbes, and he's very successful in the telco space, Dimension Data, and he was a seed investor in Vumatel and a bunch of other businesses. And we'd met a few years before, and he told me about this Vumatel business, and would I maybe want to join in an operational role or something. And I just got given the raise at Forbes and all that, and I didn't really want to leave for another job, but he said to me, look, if you ever do anything, just reach out to me, and always happy to give you advice. And I don't know if he thought I'd actually take him up on that, but when that conversation with those initial investors, partners that I mentioned, fell through, or when I was getting the sense that it was going to fall through, and I was not going to get a great deal out of it, I reached out to Rich, and I just said, hey Rich, Alex Forsyth-Thompson here, we chatted a few years ago. I'd love to reconnect and just get your advice. And man, and he's got a lot going on. He responded in like 2 hours. He's like, meet me at the Wanderers Clubhouse this afternoon if you're keen. So I was like, in. So met him and ran him through the idea, and he's just, and a lot of it was like, dude, just think bigger. Guys want to see the real big plan here. But I don't remember if it was in that specific meeting or maybe a follow up, but he kind of said, listen, I'm not interested in funding a build. Get something off the shelf as far as you can. And obviously that was the thinking. But I'll back you. And so I think 2 weeks later, I met another guy named David Rogers, who, they had a startup system. It had been around for a while, but he sort of had rebuilt it and rebranded and stuff. And he was looking for fintechs to enable, and was also raising, and he also decided to get involved. So he put his hand up. So big credit to Dave, and that's, we're still partners to this day actually, and he's got a bunch of other clients. And then another guy named Sean Richards, your listeners might know Platform 45, the software dev house. I got introduced to Sean Richards by a friend, pitched him the idea more to get a sense of a dev quote so I could have a budget for the raise, to be honest. And Sean, one of the most generous people you will ever meet, was like, dude, maybe I could come on risk on this thing as well. I mean, he had to think it was a decent idea at least. Course. And anyway, all three of them ended up following through. There was a bit of a delay because COVID hit very soon after that. So we wanted to wait it out to just see where the world would land. Mm-hmm. That was an interesting period. But those were my partners and investors, and they've actually funded every single round to date.
It's an amazing anecdote that talks to the power of relationships in this business. And I think it's an underappreciated asset. It's why we hone so strategically on trying to foster connection between folks in this ecosystem.
Yeah.
But I love this as a case study of that theory in action.
Yeah.
I think just for the listeners' sake here, you weren't the only. I don't want to say buy now, pay later, because I think you put such a transparent and refreshing spin on the concept. But there were other players in the market.
Yeah.
Payflex had kind of been acquired, or was in the process of getting acquired at that point by a big Australian BNPL player. What makes Float different? What was the proposition that made you go, we don't just want to be a competitor in this fast-growing space. We actually think we can carve out enough of a niche, especially in the context of what is now COVID 2020.
Yeah.
Right. Talk to our listeners about that. And then you can also talk about, what makes Float different and what's been some of the keys to the success over the last couple of years.
So I love the BNPL model. I mean, it's come under a lot of the regular BNPL model. As you said, we're a bit different, but I'm a big fan of it. It has come under fire for some right reasons. Some I think have been a little bit unfair, if I'm honest. But I love the fact that what BNPL does, it flips the economics of lending on its head. So just as an analogy, if I give you, I'm a normal lender, traditional lending that everyone knows. If I give you 10,000 Rand, Matt, and I say, pay me back over a year or 2 years, it's better for me the longer you take. And actually the more you borrow, because I'm earning interest, right? Compounding interest, monthly fees. So you being in debt is better for me as long as you're repaying eventually. And that's the problem, right? Because people push it too far, and then you're too far in debt, you can't repay. And that's not saying lenders are bad. I've got no problem with lending at all. I just think because of how the incentives are driven, it can cross the line and people can get into trouble. What BNPL does is it makes money almost exclusively from the merchant. So there's a fixed fee charged to the merchant, and it's interest-free to the consumer, right? And the value prop to the merchant is you are going to sell more. People will come to you because you offer this product, or people will load the basket, right? So that's the BNPL business model, which I thought was great. So,
and again, just contextually for the listeners, if you've never used a BNPL product, it basically takes a big ticket, big price item and splits the payments. Instead of one big upfront payment, splits those over payment increments, number of months, number of weeks. Float is particularly generous in that sense, and you'll speak more to that now. But is applying a very old school concept of lay-by in a hyper-modern, hyper-intuitive manner, perhaps.
So regular BNPL is actually not so much for big ticket. It's more I wouldn't say everyday purchases, but more frequent purchases. T-shirts, jeans, shoes, accessories, that sort of thing. That's the sweet spot. 1,000 Rand kind of thing, $80. But yes, it's very light touch application process, and it's more, hey, here's that $80, and if you repay, great. If you don't, well, we lock you out and we hit you with late fees and stuff. And I think now we're segueing into why we decided to go different routes. So love the model, love in essence what it's trying to do, but in all the research, discussions with customers, even when I was at corporate around credit and the problems involved, I was a little bit scared that we're not necessarily going to be solving the problem, we're going to be adding to it. And also concerns around high interest rates here in South Africa and those sort of things in the business model. But in that research, we were looking all around the world and different versions of this. And in Latin America, they didn't call it BNPL. They didn't have the cool acronym and sexy brands and tech. I think like in Brazil, it's called Parcelados or something. But that point of sale installment payments story, which Buy Now Pay Later does, has been there for ages, for decades. But in Latin America, it's mainly done off the back of the credit card. It's not a new loan given by a third party to the customer. It's the bank who sees the salary and all these things, issues the customer with the credit card, and the merchant decides, cool, I'll let you pay interest free and I'll take a bit of the hit, but you can pay it off over time. So we love that model. We just felt that there were a lot more parallels with markets like Brazil and Mexico than, say, Australia, which is very different to South Africa. And we had to figure out a few things in terms of the plumbing and getting it right in the SA payment system. And when we figured out that we could, we thought this is a hell of a spin on the model. And
almost a no-brainer. Why isn't anyone doing this yet?
Yeah, exactly. And that question was asked, and I think because it isn't easy to get right. And we're the first of its kind in Africa as far as we know. So any of these new models, when guys were doing the first instant EFTs or first cryptos, whatever, it pushes on territory that hasn't been done before, pushes boundaries, and what you find is that industries start to change. So it was amazing to pursue that route, and obviously we got it right, and now we are where we are now.
This thesis, this product starts getting refined, built, put into market. You are able to raise some equity through these connections, attract a very strong team, many of whom I'm fortunate to know in the workspace. It's not been all easy sailing, though. That makes it sound like, obviously now we just go to market. It's been widely well received. We're better than everyone else. There's been no fight. If you don't mind, what's been over the last 2-3 years, also bearing in mind you've got married and there's always stuff happening in our personal respects. What's been the tough part of this? Since finding fit, raising capital,
Yeah.
And now you're in the motions of building a significant business.
Yeah. Matters a lot. I think you have to learn to be very level-headed as a founder. It's not always easy, especially when you're very passionate as a person and in what you're doing, but to not get too stoked when you land the raise, you land the clients, and not to get too bummed when you lose a client or you have a problem on the system or issues with funding or whatever. But we have been very fortunate. As I said, with the partners and investors we have. An ex-colleague of mine at Forbes, Paul Masson, joined me as sort of my right-hand man in the business. That helped a lot. And we'd been through the trenches together. As you said, we've got a wonderful, small but wonderful team. Dude, some of the toughest moments, I think that initial sort of, we kind of got the founding of the business, we look at it as sort of December 2020, started building Jan 2021. We went into a beta July 2021, and then Paulie joined, I think, September that year. And that period from like leaving Forbes up until Paul joined, I almost had forgotten how to work in a team environment. So the whole solo founder thing sounds very admirable and all that, and I guess pulled it off to an extent, but very, very tough being by myself, trying to figure it out. A lot of pressure, can this thing work, because I've been given this money, and if it doesn't, I've potentially blown it. That was very difficult, dude. But since then, I must say, there've been one or two issues where we've had like issues in terms of the plumbing of our product, getting it right with banking partners and payment partners. That creates a lot of pressure, and a range of other funding issues. But I think the toughest part of it is you can't help but feel that your staff, your investors, your partners, my wife and my family, like everyone's looking to you. I'm not saying they're not supporting you. They absolutely are supporting you. And you can't do it without them. But mentally, you can't help but feel like it's on me and I can't let people down. And I've got to deliver for all these people that have like given their faith in me, whether joined as a staff member, put money in the business. That's the hardest thing. When things are tough, you're like, oh gosh, it's on my back.
It all rises and falls on leadership, right? That's where the buck stops, when it's going great and when it's going poorly.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think two questions, just in the interest of time, because this will be a slightly shorter interview today. But the first question is around, you built this product, you validated it early. Breaking into a fintech segment of any kind is super hard, especially in a space that's fast growing. How did you know you'd figured it out? How did you know? Do you even know? It's this idea of maybe product market fit, perhaps. You guys have spun this model that has worked in other markets. You've started introducing it to some big clients, and those clients are now in excess of 1,000 stores using Float as a payment mechanism for customers. What was the fit moment? Where did you know?
Look, Matt, I think we were very lucky that we had case studies to borrow from abroad. And again, if there are prospective founders listening, there's no problem in doing that. Absolutely, borrow what you can, modify what you can, all those sort of things. So we had a lot of case studies. We had high confidence it was going to work. But we went live with our first merchant in beta July 12th, 2021, and lots of testing and transactions that didn't work and all these things. But within, I think it was an hour or 2 hours, I can't remember, the first transaction went through and the person used it. And I thought it was one of the devs who just was like, I'll buy a mattress or something. And it was a real customer. And I phoned him and he's like, oh no, it makes sense and totally get it. And I was like, oh gosh, this is going to be a bomb. We've nailed it. Obviously it doesn't, wasn't all easy. But I think at that point we're like, look, the hypothesis is correct and this thing's going to work for sure.
The last two years have been pretty exponential, taking on loads of stores. You've landed a significant funding facility because ultimately you are lending here. Even if it's a super favorable way, there is a lending element here. Big funding facility from Standard Bank that you announced earlier this year, which I know couldn't have been easy to get over the line. But now it allows you to probably go to market with conviction.
Yeah.
Maybe talk to our listeners, founders, investors. What happens now? Do you just drive deep? Do you drive local? Is it domestic? Are you raising capital? What's happening? What's right now on the Float agenda?
Yeah, so the round we raised with Standard Bank was a debt to fund our installment book.
Sure.
When we're settling merchants, right? So I mean, critical funding, and they were awesome to work with, and a real stamp of credibility for what we're doing because it's a bank funding us, right? But yeah, we view SA as the POC. I'm not saying we're done in SA. We've got a long way to go. So we want to we will be in all the big merchants within the next 12 months. Very confident of that. We will hopefully be an option at all the major PSPs as well. A lot of those conversations going on. And we'll be in our first new market in the next while. And that's what we're busy raising more funding. I'm actually going out to market next week. But that's the future for us, man. We want to be excellent at this card-linked installment model and get it into as many territories as we can and just perfect this thing that we're doing. And yeah, the product's going to evolve from there, but that's the next milestone for us.
It's super exciting, mate, and I am quite privy to sit sometimes very close to you, so I'm well aware when it's a good day and well aware when it's not a good day. One of the questions that we do like to ask, because let's assume this all works. You enter new markets, you raise big capital. This is a significant business in the next 3 to 5 years. One of the questions we do not let guests go without answering is just what does success look like for Alex Forsyth-Thompson?
Yeah.
Once all this happens, are you going to be a multi-time founder? Is this? Yeah. Where's your head at when it comes to what all this means in the grand context of it all?
Yeah, no, that's a huge question.
It is a huge question.
And sometimes these things evolve, but honestly, I think, coming out of this, Lord willing, we build something successful and sellable to someone in the world who sees value in it, and you've created value for all your customers, and you're creating great value for all the stakeholders in the business. And I'd like to be financially secure myself for my family and my future, but to say you've delivered to these investors and partners and staff that have shown faith in you, I mean, that would be an amazing outcome. And to do it again, I would maybe need a break afterwards, but yeah, I would love to build the next thing and have an even bigger mindset, and maybe the end of the road, helping other people to do it, investing in others. But I would definitely see myself building more businesses for sure.
Alex, we're going to let you go in a second. Before we do, one quick word of wisdom for founders. You see a lot in the space. You are an early stage founder. You've learned a heck of a lot. One quick word of the wisdom for listeners on the podcast today that just you wish you knew, or something you just see folks stumbling over regularly.
Yeah. I think this is pretty generic wisdom, to be honest, but hopefully it helps some people out there. I'd say start small, lean, fast, all these things. As I keep saying, you don't just build everything from scratch and, you can't do anything without funding. Absolutely, but be very selective of the idea you choose. And I think people underestimate, there's so many ideas. You actually have so much control as to which idea you pursue, which market you pursue. And go for something flippin' big. Sometimes they're new categories and it is hard to define. But if you're going to dedicate your life to doing something, there is no help for anyone aiming small. And I think just getting your mindset in that space will change things for you enormously.
Beautiful wisdom. I think to end today's episode you say it's common wisdom, but it's eloquently put. So I trust that drives home with a number of our listeners today. And we are incredibly excited to see what is next for the Float business. Thank you so much, of course, for being on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, Alex Forsyth-Thompson, co-founder and CEO of Float.
Thanks for having me, Matt. And love what you're doing and look forward to watching it grow.
Thanks so much for listening to today's episode. We really trust you enjoyed it as much as we did. That was Alex Forsyth-Thompson, CEO and founder of Float. I'm Matthew Marsden, and if you enjoyed the episode, please be sure to subscribe to our channel, follow us on our socials, and share it with your network. We'll see you next time.